In this episode of Humble History, we will cover the life of Emperor Yohannes IV, one of the major monarchs in modern Ethiopian history. Let's get into it right now. Emperor Yohannes's birth name was Kasa Mircha. He was a noble from the northern region of Tigray. We know little about his early life. There is more information from when he was competing for power following the death of Emperor Tewodros. The death of Tewodros opened the question of who would take the throne. Three major contenders emerged. Firstly, Wakshum Gobaziev Lasta, who had been Tewodros' opponent, and with his death, he moved more aggressively for the crown. Secondly, Minilik of Shoa, who had been a prisoner of Tewodros, now groomed to take control of the southern regions of Ethiopia. And finally, in the north, Kasa Mircha. Wakshum Gobaziev coronated himself as ruler with the title of Emperor Takla Giorgis. He made peace with his rival Minilik, agreeing to give him the region past the Bashilo River. However, the same agreement couldn't be reached with Kasa Mircha. Kasa Mircha and Emperor Takla Giorgis fought in 1871 at the Battle of Assam. Although Kasa Mircha only had 12,000 soldiers versus Takla Giorgis' 60,000 troops, he was able to secure a quick victory over Takla Giorgis because of his army's superior firepower, which he had acquired from the British when they came to attack the previous Emperor Tewodros. The following year, Kasa Mircha was crowned emperor, taking the name of Yohannes IV. As emperor, he used a single method for his internal policy. As opposed to Tewodros' unwavering approach to a centralist government, Yohannes applied a much more cautious approach by empowering regional lords. He particularly focused on creating an equilibrium between two of his most powerful vassals, Minilik of Shoa and Adal of Gojam. Yohannes's internal policies also had religious aspects. His attitude towards religion, however, were not as tolerant as his attitude towards governance. The same year, as the Lecce Agreement was made, Yohannes organized the Council of Borumeda. The Council of Borumeda was a religious council that put an end to the division in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church by declaring the Tewahedo Orthodox Church as the only valid doctrine. Pushing his religious intolerance further, Yohannes didn't allow space for Islam in his world. This intolerance was particularly felt in the province of Wello. The Muslims of Wello were told to convert to Christianity or lose their land and property. Although some chose to exile and left Wello, many of the nobility converted to Christianity. Externally, Yohannes's reign was in constant dispute, mainly by an encroaching Egyptian force. The Egyptian ruler, Khedive Ismail, had great ambitions of expanding Egypt's territory within the continent into Sudan and Ethiopia. Ismail was backed by the European forces, particularly the British, who had large investments in Egypt. Yohannes reached out to the different European nations asking for intervention against the Egyptians. He argued on the basis of religion, stating that Christian Europe should help Ethiopia fight off Muslim Egypt. However, no European country agreed to take Ethiopia's side. In 1875, Ismail had ordered his troops to the interior of Ethiopia. Yohannes called for the mobilization of all his northern forces. After his call, he was at the head of a 20,000 troop army that was 10 times larger than Egypt's 2,000 troops. The two forces met at the Battle of Gundet. The battle was one of the shortest in Ethiopian history. The Egyptian army was lured into a steep valley, Ethiopian soldiers enclosing them on both sides on the head of the valley. The rifles pointing down, the Egyptians were almost wiped out. Colonel Dai, an American working on the side of the Egyptians, wrote this on the Battle of Gundat. No cry of quartet, no supplication to the sun or the prophet could stay the bloody hand. In vain appeals were made to the conquering foe by upright or prostrate forms transfixed by lance or spear, by men with armless bodies or nearly headless trunks, their life blood pouring from every gashing wound. Nothing could stay the bloody carnage. Doomed as they taught mercilessly, fated was this little band. They escaped the bullet only to feel the scimitar, or resisted the dub only to be lanced. The Egyptian would launch another attack. The following year, they marched with 15,000 troops at the Battle of Qurra. The battle lasted for 3 days, with the Egyptians fighting from more strategic positions than the previous battle. However, the consequence was the same: Ethiopian victory, although with larger casualties. Of this battle, Colonel Dai wrote, "After the victory, the Egyptians yielded to terms with Yohannes in what was later called the Hewett Treaty. The treaty returned land back to Ethiopia. However, it was not a complete surrender, because Egypt's backer England still had weight in the region. Regardless, this treaty led to the height of Yohannes's power. He emerged a leader who vanquished foreign forces. However, the Egyptian invasion had some repercussion. As the Egyptians were withdrawing from northern Ethiopian territory, Italy would occupy the northern region of Mazawa as a new threat. The situation escalated when Yohannes's governor in the north attacked the Italians at the Battle of Dogali. This attack, which the Italians claimed was unprovoked, put Ethiopia in potential hot water with not only Italy, but major European powers. Although Yohannes sent communication campaigns to England to smooth over relations with Europe, he had a much more pressing problem from Ethiopia's neighbor, Sudan. In Sudan, the Mahdist movement was taking place. The movement was born partly out of religious revivalism and partly out of Sudanese nationalism against the occupying Egyptians. The Mahdist animosity and attacks were primarily against the Egyptians. However, Yohannes honored the section of the Hewett Treaty that made Ethiopia aid Egypt in Sudan. This made Ethiopia the enemy of Sudan according to the Mahdist, and therefore Ethiopia would face Mahdist fury as well. The most decisive of battles between Yohannes and the Mahdist would happen at Matamma. Initially, Yohannes sent Takla Haymanot of Godjam to attack the Mahdist. Takla Haymanot's army successfully captured Matamma. However, this would not last long. A year later, the Mahdist overwhelmed the Ethiopians, taking Matamma and moving further inland and sacking the city of Gondar. At this point, Yohannes was not only fighting the Mahdists, but he was also fighting Minilik and Takla Haymanot, who had conspired to remove him as emperor. He attacked Godjam to destroy Takla Haymanot's power. Next, he moved to Shaw for Minilik, but Minilik was now receiving firearms from the Italians and was preparing for the emperor's attack. Yohannes decided not to attack Minilik just yet. He instead decided to go to Matamma, defeat the Mahdists, and then return to Minilik. This would prove a fatal error for Yohannes. Although his forces defeated the Mahdists, Yohannes himself received a fatal wound. He died the following day. Despite his untimely death, Emperor Yohannes is still celebrated today. His role in pushing back 2 foreign invaders makes him one of the most important figures in modern Ethiopian history.